The worst part of being a night shift nurse is not the patients, the coworkers, or the low pay. It is the lonely drive home at 7 a.m. when your mind is racing and it is pitch black outside. Hi, I'm here to tell you about what happened to my friend Stacy and how she ended up framed for murder. Stacy had been working as a nurse for over 20 years and she loved her job. She worked nights so that she could spend her days taking care of her sick mother. But lately, the hospital had been understaffed and they kept telling the nurses to do more with less. So when Stacy clocked into work, she noticed that not only was her patient's room empty, but so were all the other rooms down the hall. Where were the patients? And where were the other nurses? At first, Stacy thought maybe they'd all taken a break. But when she checked the clock, she realized that they were supposed to be back 10 minutes ago. And if this was some kind of prank, it wasn't very funny. As the only person on the floor, Stacy now had to take care of all the patients by herself. She tried calling for backup, but no one picked up the phone. So she grabbed a clipboard and started making rounds. As she rounded the corner, she saw a horrifying sight. One of the rooms was filled with blood. Then she heard a noise from one of the supply closets. When she opened the door, she saw a bloodied meat cleaver on the floor. Her heart began to race as she slowly backed out of the closet. Who had done this? Had someone broken into the hospital? Or was this a case of friendly fire? Was this why the staff had disappeared? Just then, the elevator dinged and Stacy froze. If anyone else had come into the room, then they would have seen her holding the bloody meat cleaver. So instead of waiting for whoever it was to come inside, she quickly dropped it behind a shelf and turned off the overhead light before dashing into the hallway. The supply closet door was propped open as she made her way down the hall. She needed to get away and fast. But just as she reached the elevators, a voice echoed through the halls. "Nurse, what's going on? Who said that?" Was someone else hiding in the supply closet watching her every move? Did they want to hurt her? She ran to the stairwell and flew down the stairs, ignoring the pain in her legs and the pounding of her heart. When she got outside, she quickly called the police and told them everything. The officers listened patiently, but after she finished, they didn't believe her story. They told her that she was the prime suspect and they had evidence to back it up. Evidence? What evidence? She hadn't touched anything. She hadn't even seen the victim. Right then, an officer walked up behind her and put handcuffs on her wrists. He said, "Ma'am, you need to come with us." Then he pulled her toward the patrol car and shoved her inside. When the police arrived at the hospital, they found something that sent chills down their spines. Security footage from the hospital showed that Stacy was the only person who had entered the supply closet. And not only that, but she was also the last person to leave. This proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that she had killed her patient. She watched in disbelief as the police entered the supply closet. It looked different during the day. There was nothing in it. The meat cleaver had vanished. And when they asked the night shift staff what they remembered, everyone had the same story. They couldn't remember anything. It was like their memories had been wiped clean. But Stacy knew she hadn't done it. Someone had set her up. But how? She was taken down to the station house where an officer read her rights. But she didn't care about her rights. She wanted to prove her innocence. She wanted to show the police that someone was lying. But what? All she had was her word against the security footage. How could she possibly win against the footage? That's when she had an epiphany. She asked for a pen and paper and wrote down a few numbers. "I think I can prove that the cameras are lying," she told the officer. "They have a blind spot." The officer looked at her, confused. "What do you mean?" Stacy explained that the surveillance footage only covered certain areas. So while it could prove that she'd entered the supply closet, it couldn't prove that she'd killed the patient. Now she had his attention. "Let's go see those cameras," the officer said. Stacy led the officers to the surveillance room where she explained that the camera angles were set up in a way that wouldn't catch the whole room. To prove it, she told the officers which camera angle they needed to check. They reviewed the tape, and sure enough, the camera didn't cover the whole room. Maybe there was more to the story, but how could this happen? Why did someone set her up? Was it personal? As the sun began to set, Stacy went back to the hospital to look for clues. When she arrived at the nurse's station, she noticed something strange. All the nurses' badges were gone, including hers. But that meant that the footage would show them all leaving together. Suddenly, she felt sick to her stomach. Could it really be possible that she'd killed her patient? Maybe she had no memory of it. Maybe she did. She was led back to the supply closet, and this time the lights were on, but it was still empty. That was until the police found a name tag under the shelf. The name tag read David. David. It rang a bell, but whose name was it? Then she remembered. David was the orderly who had been working the night shift. He was supposed to help the nurses take care of the patients, but he often spent his shifts playing video games in the supply closet. Sometimes Stacy would find him in there and tell him to get back to work. Could it be? Was David the killer? Was he the one who set her up? And where was he now? Stacy called his name, hoping that he would come out and explain everything. But she heard a crash from inside the closet. She peeked around the corner and saw that he had fallen backwards out of the top shelf. He had apparently been trying to hide up there. Stacy rushed to his side and asked him questions, but he kept passing out. He was in bad shape. She told the police that he had probably inhaled some of the cleaning chemicals, and they took him away. But later that night, they came back with bad news. He was awake, but he couldn't remember anything. He didn't remember killing anyone. He didn't remember playing video games. In fact, he didn't remember anything that had happened the night before. But Stacy knew he was hiding something. So she went back to the hospital to look for clues. She figured that if David had played video games in the supply closet, then he would have brought his headphones. So she searched the closet, and sure enough, she found them. This was big. It gave her leverage against him. She could finally prove that he had been there that night. But when she handed the headphones to the police, they didn't seem impressed. "We already have evidence that he was there," they said. "He has blood on his clothes. Blood on his clothes." But what did that mean? Did that mean that he'd attacked someone? Did he kill someone? Suddenly, Stacy felt a chill run down her spine. Was David the real killer? And if he wasn't, then why did he have blood on his clothes? Back at the station house, Stacy demanded to see the footage again. This time she focused on something else. She watched as David entered the supply closet, then waited patiently for him to come back out. And when he did, he was holding something in his hands. She couldn't make out what it was, but it looked heavy. Then it hit her. The video had proven that David was guilty, but it also proved that he wasn't the killer. The thing that he was holding was a trash bag. And if he was carrying a trash bag, then he wasn't carrying a meat cleaver. Suddenly, Stacy was filled with determination. She needed to prove that David wasn't the killer, but there was only one problem. The only person who knew where the cameras didn't pick up was her. She was the only one who knew where the blind spot was. But then she had an idea. If she went back to the hospital and pretended to search for clues, then maybe she could find the real killer without the police following her. So she thanked the officers for their time and headed back to the hospital. She needed to find the missing piece of evidence, the meat cleaver, but where would it be? She started by searching the supply closet, but it was no use. The room was empty. That's when she noticed the small gap under the door. She bent down and peeked inside. It was pitch black. She couldn't see anything. So she turned on her phone's flashlight and shined it through the gap. And that's when she saw it. The meat cleaver was sitting on the floor right next to a pair of scraps. But what did that mean? Was this the real killer? But then she noticed something strange. The scraps were familiar. They looked like they belonged to the chief of surgery. Could it be? Was the chief of surgery the killer? He was always nice to her. He would never hurt a fly. But then again, she didn't know him that well. She turned off her flashlight and stood up. She needed to get more evidence. She needed to catch the killer. But how? Then she remembered the janitor's closet. It was close to the supply closet. Maybe the killer had used it to dispose of the evidence. But when she arrived at the closet, she noticed that the door was slightly ajar. She opened it and gasped in surprise. The closet was filled with cameras. These weren't security cameras. They were hidden cameras. Who was spying on the hospital? And what were they doing? That's when she heard a voice behind her. "Nice try, Stacy, but it's over now." She turned around to see the chief of surgery standing there with a gun in his hand. But why? Why was he here? Why was he spying on them? Why? She asked, but he ignored her and kept walking. That's when she realized what he was doing. He was trying to plant evidence. He wanted to make it look like she was the killer, but she wasn't going to let him. She ran after him and tackled him to the ground. As they struggled on the floor, she tried to grab the gun, but he was too strong. Then she bit him on the hand and he screamed in pain. She used the distraction to grab the gun and point it at him. "Don't move," she said. "You're under arrest." But he didn't listen. He lunged at her and they both fell to the ground. As the gun went off, shooting them both in the chest. As the police arrived, they found Stacy and the chief of surgery lying on the floor. He was dead. She was alive. The police were puzzled. Who was the chief of surgery? Why was he at the hospital at night? And why did he kill the patient? But when they looked closer at Stacy, they noticed something strange. She didn't have a badge. The evidence was clear. Stacy wasn't a nurse. She was a patient. And she hadn't killed the other patient. She had escaped from her hospital bed and wandered into the wrong ward. The police didn't know this, though. They didn't realize that she had been framed. They didn't know that someone had swapped her patient S bed with another patient S bed, and that the footage had been tampered with. She had killed the other patient in self-defense, but she was still the only one who knew the truth. As the ambulance drove her away, she looked back at the hospital. She wondered who was responsible, but little did she know the real killer was the only one who never appeared on camera.